Stop on by for the finest in flavor. It was scribbled across the sign posted on the highway leading into Fernwood, just under the heading Burger Shack. It was just another one of the promotions for the new restaurant that were popping up all around town. It was a project that had remained somewhat of a secret until recently, which was an accomplishment all on its own, considering how difficult it is to hold a secret in any small town, especially Fernwood. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that it wasn't much of a small town. Not anymore. It had grown quite a bit over the last decade. Rick watched it grow from the bottom. He had been there his whole life, all the way back to when it was mostly fields. At that time, you had to travel 180 kilometers west where the big city was if you needed anything out of the ordinary. Fernwood had always been able to provide the people with life's basic necessities, but if you wanted anything special, the city was the way to go. Fernwood became a village in 1955 and became a town 16 years later. Rick ran and operated an auto mechanic shop that used to be an abandoned saloon back before there ever was a Fernwood. It used to be a little ways out of town, but as the town grew it got a bit closer, but not too close. His house was there too, built a short distance behind the shop. Rick enjoyed his privacy. As the town grew, he got worried that he might lose it. But as the years passed on, he grew less and less concerned. He was sure the town would reach over there someday, when the town grew up to become a city, but that wasn't his time. Rick was an old man. For 50 years Rick ran that place, open every day except for Sunday. He was somewhat of a religious man. He kept Sunday for God. Of course, if someone was in a serious bind, he would be there to help him. That was up until about 9 months ago, when he suffered from a fatal heart attack. Rick was 75 years old. He had one daughter, Christine, who moved out of town as soon as she could. Like most of the teenagers growing up there, she thought it would turn out to be a dead end. When she got the news of her father's death, she flew back and handled everything that needed to be handled. Her mother had passed years ago from cancer. Rick loved her very much and never looked at another woman for love again. So, with no one else in the immediate family, the shop was of course left to Christine. She didn't know much about cars, so she did the only logical thing she could think of. She sold it. The sale went through the real estate agency, so she never met the new owners, and neither did anybody else, with the exception of the broker who took pride in his tight lips. Immediately after the building was sold, the house being sold with it, tarps were draped all over the shop. It remained that way for the next 8 months, and in those 8 months the house remained empty, almost until everyone forgot about it. After the 8 months had passed, a family had moved in. Nobody got a chance to talk to them, to find anything out, because the family never came into town. They kept well to themselves. This wasn't a problem for the gossip queens. They all jumped to the conclusions of what it was going to be when ads began to pop up in the local paper. Posters began to appear all over town. There was going to be a new burger shack. One day, someone had driven past Rick's old shop and the tarps were gone. Many people drove by that day, not because they had business in that direction, but because people talk, and the people that listened wanted to see the ruby-red building with the giant neon hamburger-shaped sign over top of some bright yellow doors that said, Burger Shack. The people were excited. The people couldn't wait for it to open. Nobody was sure of when that would be, but you could bet it would be busy when it did. Emmett knew none of this, though. Emmett wasn't from town. He was just a passerby. At least that's what his intentions were. Emmett drove past the sign on the highway and took a long enough glance for it to take hold of his attention. It had potential to be a friendly place, Emmett thought, and if it was daytime, he would have stopped there for sure. But it wasn't daytime, and he was sure it wouldn't be open. He looked at the clock on the radio as it turned from 2:33 to 2:34. He sure was hungry. Couldn't remember the last time he ate. It must have been at least 24 hours. Things had got a little bit hectic since then. His wife Jasmine had been acting strange in the last few months, not being her usual self. They hadn't been married for long. They dated for less than a year before that, but he knew her long enough to know that something wasn't right. It started with her working late. Emmett had no problem with this at first. They were a young couple just getting started in the world, and of course they needed the money. The only problem was the money wasn't coming. She had been working all these overtime hours and only coming home with a regular pay. Emmett never questioned her about this, but as the time passed on, he could feel a change in the atmosphere between them. He knew she was fucking around, just didn't know who with, and when it came down to it, he really didn't care who it was she was cheating with. After all, it wasn't that particular person's responsibility to be loyal. It was her responsibility, and hers alone. Another sign popped up in the distance. He couldn't make out the words quite yet, but from the design he could tell it was another Burger Shack promotion. When he got close enough to read Burger Shack, open 24 hours, 4 kilometers, he had decided that he would stop there. It wasn't really his decision alone. If it was up to him, he would have kept on driving. He could have driven forever as far as he was concerned. Put all of that chaos as far behind him as he could, but it was his stomach that was troubling him. It had been growling for a while now. Emmett didn't notice though. He was too focused on the events he didn't want to focus on. But so much time had passed between now and his last meal, the emptiness in his stomach became quite painful. It was most likely a wise decision to stop for a rest and grab something to eat. He remembered the last time he kissed his wife, the last time he had made sweet, sweet love. The only problem was it wasn't so sweet anymore. The magic was gone. He assumed he wasn't fucking her as good as whoever this newfound lover was. Maybe it was just one guy, maybe it was a bunch of them. Maybe some women, too. After all, that's what whores do. And as far as he was concerned, that's all that she was. But that wasn't all that she was. She was his wife, too. Emmett began to feel faint as he thought more and more about it. He began to think about his last encounter with Jasmine. It wasn't pretty. He didn't care, though. At least that was what he told himself. He believed it, too. Another sign appeared. It read, Burger Shack, next exit. Emmett turned his blinker on and turned off onto the next exit ramp. It wasn't long until he saw the building. There was a strange atmosphere around it. Something wasn't quite right. He couldn't figure it out, though. He never really thought about it at the time. Maybe if he had, he wouldn't have stopped there, which in turn would have made his life a hell of a lot easier. But then again, considering his situation, it might not have been. He pulled into the empty parking lot. For a moment he thought they might have been closed. He remembered the previous sign which said, open 24 hours. The open sign on the door was turned on, but the lights were all off in the dining area. It appeared as if they were closed. Emmett didn't care. He was there, he was hungry, and he was going to eat. A bell rang as it was struck when the door opened. Emmett walked in and had a look around. It looked like a friendly place, or what had potential to be a friendly place, had he come at the right time. A place you could take your whole family. A place where a pee-wee hockey team would go to celebrate after a victory. Maybe a place two lovers could go on a first date. The last thought turned his stomach, and he wondered if he would even be able to hold down whatever he was about to devour. He was sure he could. He hoped he could. A young woman walked around from the back. She had long blonde hair that would most likely dangle down to the midsection of her back. It was tied up into a bun at the moment. Her eyes were a brilliant blue. You would imagine an angel would have. Her name tag said Sue, and she was beautiful. "It's awfully late to be out on a Tuesday night, don't you think?" she asked. "I'm sorry, are you not open?" "Sort of. Not really. We're just getting ready to open. As a business. We just been getting things ready this whole time, so that's why we're closed. You must have read the signs up on the highway that says we're a 24-hour establishment." "Well, yeah, that and how you got the open sign on and the door unlocked." "Is that thing on?" She looked over and seemed annoyed. "Oh, that Robert can't do anything right. He's my brother. He works here with us. You see, this is a family-run establishment. He was fooling around with them signs earlier. Must have been making sure it was working or something. Then that dingbat went ahead and left it on. Well, now I'll feel guilty if I don't get you something. I'll turn on the light in the corner over there. You go grab a seat and I'll be back to let you know what we have to offer. I really don't mean to be any trouble," Emmett said. "Oh, it's no trouble at all," she said, as she turned off the open sign and disappeared into the back. Emmett walked around to have a look at the place. The lights turned on over by a booth seat in the corner, the type of booth where you wouldn't be noticed if someone came in. He walked over to the booth and sat down. He was slow. He was thinking, still thinking. There was no stopping that. Shortly after he sat down, the girl came back with a pot of coffee in her hand and a coffee mug in the other. She put down the mug and poured him a cup. "You're going to want some of this," she said. "You take any cream or sugar?" "No, black is fine," Emmett replied. "All right, I can get you a hamburger. Ain't got no bacon, though. We got turkey or egg salad sandwiches, macaroni salad, french fries, and deep-fried cod." "You got cheese for those burgers?" "Well, of course we do." "In that case, I'll do the cheese with the burger and a few fries if that's all right." "That's just fine." "Sue, is it?" "Why, yes, sir, that is my name. Thank you for noticing," Sue said as she went into the back again, making sure to lock the door. Emmett didn't notice that. He took a sip of his coffee and had a relaxing moment of silence. He was waiting for that moment. Everything had been so intense for the last while, he didn't even realize how good the coffee actually was. As a matter of fact, if he wasn't so distracted by life, he would have told you that this cup of coffee was the best cup of coffee he had ever had in his entire life. But instead, he zoned out. His thoughts were too heavy. For a moment, he thought about fixing things, changing the situation, and just going back. Then he wondered how he would do it. There was no way. Emmett closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and thought about the events that happened not so long ago. After months of suspicion and minor questioning, which were answered with lies, he decided to do some investigation. Emmett would wake up at 7 every workday morning. He would kiss his wife on the cheek, then go downstairs to make some coffee and toast. This was, of course, after the morning bathroom rituals, which would put him downstairs in the kitchen at 25 after 7. He would then get the newspaper, which was delivered on the front porch, go back to the kitchen, pour the coffee, and retrieve his toast from the toaster. Next, he would turn on the little television, which rested on the counter of the kitchen. He never had to change a channel. It was always on the news. He would sit, he would read, he would look, he would listen, he would drink, and he would eat, all at the same time. This would last until 7:45. That's when he would get ready to leave. Depending on the weather conditions, these events could change, but on this day in particular, that's what it was. After that, the routine got a little different. Most days he would drive to the corner store, purchase another coffee, a lottery ticket, and proceed to work. This day, though, he only drove around the block. Then he parked. He parked far enough down the street not to be seen, but close enough to see everything. Emmett waited. A few hours had passed when he started to think maybe he was wrong. Maybe she wasn't lying. Maybe she did love him as much as he loved her. Maybe even more. He started to feel bad about how he didn't trust her anymore. He thought maybe he should leave. The only problem was he didn't know where to go. He called in sick to work, so he couldn't go there. Emmett sat and thought about where to go. He didn't think long, though. All at once his newfound doubt was thrown out the window, while his original doubt, which he had on his wife, was back in full effect. It was a fancy-looking car, and it was turning into his driveway. He watched a young stud of a Negro man get out of the driver's side door. It wasn't even 2 seconds until Jasmine came running out, wrapping her whorish arms around him and pressing her lips to his. He was too far away to be certain, but he was pretty sure she slipped a tongue into his mouth. Emmett felt a hate in his heart. Hate for both of them. He watched them disappear into the house, her giggling like a little whorish schoolgirl. Emmett started his car and drove it up to the house. He leaned over and opened his glove box where he had tucked away an 1861 Remington. It was old, but the guy who sold it to him showed him that it worked. He fired a couple shots and the man did not lie. He didn't look like the type of guy who would tell a lie anyway. Oliver was his name. Emmett stared at the gun for a moment, thinking if this was the right thing to do, knowing damn well that it wasn't. He reached over, pulled it out, and tucked it into the front of his trousers. Emmett got out of the car, shut the door, and made his way to the house. He turned the handle on the door to the main entrance, and just as he suspected, it was locked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys. It was a little bit difficult due to the rage that had currently overcome his body. He couldn't quite hold it together. Tears filled his eyes as the keys spilled out of his hand and onto the ground. He reached down and picked them up. As he got back up, he took a deep breath to regain his composure. He thought for a moment. He thought long and hard about what was about to happen, and if that wasn't what he was thinking, that's what it should have been. He was calm now. He knew what he had to do. He put the key into the lock without a problem this time. He turned it and heard the click of the deadbolt hitting the unlocked position. Ever so slowly he opened the door. He took one step in and listened. He couldn't hear anything, not at first. He was all the way in the house now. He closed the door. He took a few steps toward the stairs that led up to the bedroom where he and his wife shared their most intimate moments. It was at this point he could hear what was happening, the creaking of the bed springs, the moans of pleasure, and then, just like that, the rage was back. Emmett was about to bolt up the stairs, kick in the door, and, well, he wasn't sure after that. That's what stopped him from doing it. Once again, Emmett regained his composure and tiptoed up the stairs. He got to the top as the moaning got louder. He wasn't sure if he could handle it. More tears filled his eyes. He was close to crumpling and sobbing like a little bitch. But he didn't. He sure wanted to, though. As he got closer to the room, he passed the photographs on the wall of him and Jasmine, having so much fun together. The Paris vacation, Christmas of 2012, the picnic where he made his proposal, even the wedding pictures. Emmett wondered what she thought when she brought that man through here. He wondered what the man thought, too. It made him sick to his stomach. When he got to the room, the door was closed. He could hear the sounds. He reached for the doorknob and held it for a little while. He wasn't sure if he could do it. Maybe it would be easier to slip on back out and pretend this wasn't happening. Pretend it never happened. But there was too much life ahead for him to live and let this go on. Emmett turned the handle and slowly pushed open the door. Not much, just a bit. Enough for Emmett to take a peek and destroy any thoughts of innocence in regards to the situation. She was riding him all right. Emmett's rage returned in a flash. It was a bit exhausting going through all of these emotions so quickly. He began to panic and took a step back. He took another long, deep breath and pondered his next move, his next decision. No matter what it was definitely going to be a life-changing event. Not just for him, but for everyone. This was it. This was Emmett's moment. He reached into his pants and retrieved his gun. He took a deep breath and... "Excuse me, sir." Sue was holding a plate with a cheeseburger and fries. She looked a bit concerned. "Are you all right?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Emmett said. "I just sort of zoned out for a minute." "You got lots on your mind," Sue said as she set down the plate in front of him. "Oh, it's nothing. I have my doubts. Can I get you anything else?" "No, thanks. I should be fine from here." "All right. Just holler if you need anything." "Thanks." Sue once again disappeared into the back of the kitchen. Emmett looked at his burger with delight. Maybe it was just because he was hungry, but Emmett was certain that this burger was the best-looking burger he had ever seen. It wasn't just a look, though. It had a real nice smell, too. Unfamiliar, yet pleasant at the same time. Emmett took a big bite, and sure enough, it was delicious. It was some good meat, probably some top-notch Alberta beef. That's where the best beef came from. There was more to it than that, though. The sauce on it was spectacular. The party of flavors dancing in his mouth had made him completely forget about the thoughts that had been haunting him for a while. A smile even made it to his face. When he was halfway done, which didn't take long, Sue had come back out to see how he was doing. Before she could even make her presence be known, she noticed he had become somewhat of an animal, devouring his meal, almost as if it was his last. Sue could see that everything was fine and decided against bothering him, at least for the moment. When she came back out 7 minutes later, there was nothing but plate. "Wow," Sue said. "You sure were some kind of hungry." "I didn't think I was," Emmett replied, "but I guess the facts here prove otherwise. And by the way, that burger was delicious. Probably the best I ever had." "Thanks, I'll let Chef know." "What kind of sauce that is you got on 'em?" "Well, I'm afraid I can't tell you that. It's a family secret." "Well, in that case, I wouldn't mind getting the bill. You've been kind enough. I wouldn't want to take up any more of your time." "I'll be right back." As Sue walked into the back, Emmett leaned into his seat with a look of complete satisfaction. It reminded him of the days he would have turkey dinner with the family and unbuckle his belt to give his belly some breathing room while he laid on the couch until he passed out. He was having a difficult time staying seated and became frightfully aware that it was becoming extremely hard to keep his eyes open. As he struggled with his newfound challenge, he felt the room begin to spin. Everything was so hard to do now. He couldn't even speak right. When Sue came back with the bill, he tried to talk to her, but he couldn't. It was all mumbles. Sue didn't care, though. She wasn't interested in rescuing him. After all, that would delete the purpose of putting the drug into his food. Emmett's head came crashing down onto the table in front of him. The last thing he saw before he took his nap was the shadow of Sue standing above him. And then there was nothing.